I am 21 years old, and I live in Oregon. My house is in a quiet, isolated suburb about 40 minutes outside of Portland. The properties here are spaced pretty far apart. I have a large backyard that doesn't have a fence. It just ends where a massive, dense stretch of pine woods begins. I live alone, except for my dog, a heavy German Shepherd mix named Duke. This happened last January, during one of the worst snowstorms our county had seen in a decade. The local news had been warning people to stay off the roads since the afternoon. By 9 p.m., there was already about a foot of snow on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. I love the snow, mostly because of the quiet it brings. Snow acts like a natural soundproofer. But that night, the silence felt a little too heavy. Around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on my living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching a movie on Netflix. The only light in the room was coming from the TV screen. Duke was asleep on the rug near the coffee table. Everything was perfectly normal, until Duke suddenly woke up. He didn't bark. He just lifted his head off his paws and stared toward the back of the house. His ears were pinned flat against his skull. Then, a very low, continuous growl started vibrating in his chest. I muted the TV. The sudden silence in the house was deafening. The only thing I could hear was the wind whipping against the siding of the house. "Duke, what is it?" I whispered. Duke stood up. The fur on the back of his neck was standing straight up. He walked slowly toward the kitchen area, keeping his eyes locked on the sliding glass door that leads out to the backyard deck. I have thick, vertical blinds covering that glass door, so I couldn't see outside. But Duke's reaction put me on edge. I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray animal trying to find shelter on the deck. I got off the couch and walked over to the glass door. I grabbed the plastic cord and pulled the blinds back. It was pitch black outside. The snow was falling so heavily, it looked like a wall of static. I reached over to the wall switch and turned on the backyard floodlight. The sudden bright light illuminated the entire deck and the yard stretching out toward the woods. There were no animals on the deck, but there was something else. My backyard was a pristine, untouched sheet of flat white snow, except for one single, clear trail of footprints. They were heavy, deep boot prints. They started all the way at the dark edge of the tree line. I traced the path with my eyes. They walked in a perfectly straight, deliberate line across my yard, up the 3 wooden steps of my deck, and stopped exactly in front of the glass door I was standing behind. I stared at the space on the deck, right on the other side of the glass. The snow was heavily trampled there, like someone had been standing in that exact spot for a long time, just watching the house. My mouth went completely dry. I looked back out into the yard, trying to find the second set of tracks, the tracks leading away from the house. There were none. The snow to the left and right of the deck was perfectly undisturbed. Whoever walked out of those woods and up to my back door never walked back. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe they walked along the edge of the deck and jumped off the side. I leaned closer to the glass, looking hard at the snow around the perimeter of the deck. Smooth, untouched. I checked the metal latch on the sliding door. It was pushed down in the locked position. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The door was locked. I was safe inside. I decided I was going to call the non-emergency police line just to have a patrol car drive by. But as I stepped back from the glass, My sock absorbed something cold and wet. I looked down at my feet. There was a puddle of muddy water on the hardwood floor. I didn't move. I just stared at the floorboards. Right next to the puddle was a wet, muddy impression of a boot. It was inside the house. I slowly traced my eyes along the hardwood floor. There was another muddy print about 2 feet away, and then another. They started at the sliding glass door. The track of the door had a small piece of crushed ice stuck in it, preventing the lock from actually catching the metal frame. The door had been unlocked the entire night. The wet prints moved silently across the kitchen tiles, transitioning onto the hardwood of the living room. I followed the muddy trail with my eyes. They walked past the kitchen island. They walked past the TV stand. They ended directly behind the couch. The exact same couch I had just been sitting on for the last 2 hours. I was standing by the glass door. The couch was about 15 feet away from me. Duke was no longer looking at the glass door. He was standing in the middle of the room, his teeth bared, staring directly at the dark space behind the couch. The house was completely dead silent. Then, from behind the fabric of the couch, a voice spoke. It was a man's voice. It was a dry, raspy whisper. "Good dog." I didn't think. I didn't try to grab a weapon. Pure, unfiltered adrenaline exploded in my chest. My car keys were sitting on the kitchen counter right next to me. I snatched them, grabbed the handle of the front door, yanked it open, and sprinted out into the freezing snowstorm in just my socks and a t-shirt. "Duke, come!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. Duke bolted out the door right behind me. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I ran to my car parked in the driveway, hit the unlock button on the fob, threw the door open, and practically dove into the driver's seat. Duke jumped in the back. I slammed the door and hit the power locks. I jammed the key into the ignition, threw the car in reverse, and backed out blindly into the unplowed street. The tires spun and fishtailed in the deep snow, but I didn't care. I slammed the gas pedal and drove about half a mile down the road until I reached a well-lit intersection. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. I could barely speak to the operator because I was hyperventilating so hard. 2 police cruisers showed up at my house about 20 minutes later. I waited in my car down the street until an officer radioed that the house was secure. I walked back inside with them. The front door was still wide open. The house was empty. The intruder was gone. He had walked right out the open front door after I ran. But the police found something else. On the coffee table, right in front of the couch where I had been sitting, was a large, heavy, steel hunting knife. The officer pointed out that there was a puddle of melted snow right behind the couch, proving the man had been crouching there for a long time. He was standing behind me while I watched TV. He was close enough to reach out and touch the back of my head. He only spoke because my dog noticed him. If Duke hadn't woken up, I don't know what that man would have done with that knife. I broke my lease the very next week and moved into an apartment complex in the city, on the 4th floor. I lock every single door and window the second I get home. But no matter how many locks I check, whenever it snows heavily and the world outside gets completely quiet, I can't sit on a couch without making sure the back of it is pushed tightly against a solid wall.